Hello and welcome to episode 187 of the Chills of Will podcast. It's a pleasure today to be joined by V Castro. And here's a little bit about V Castro, who is a two-time Bram Stoker award-nominated writer born in San Antonio, Texas, to Mexican-American parents. She's been writing horror stories since she was a child, always fascinated by Mexican folklore and the urban legends of Texas. Castro now lives in the United Kingdom with her family, writing and traveling with her children. Well, it is a pleasure to talk to you across the pond. Thanks so much for your time. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me. Thank you. It's great to always talk about books and horror books. So I really
Yes.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. How's your British accent?
None. No British accent.
Fair enough. Well, yeah, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. Looking forward to talking to you about the Haunting of Alejandra and all
You.
kinds of things. I'd love to know, in your bio talks about being fascinated by Mexican folklore and the urban legends of Texas, growing up in San Antonio. I'd love to know about your early reading and writing life. As well as language. I mean, were you monolingual English, bilingual Spanish and English? How did that work?
Yeah, well, I'm one of those Mexicans that speaks only English. I came from a family of immigrants, farm workers, and yeah, it was important to assimilate. It was important
Mm,
to um be perceived as American,
uh-huh.
and um, it wasn't like it is now, at least the way I have grown up now as I'm a woman, and with my own children, where
Hmm.
being bilingual is great. It's an
Sure.
asset. However, it wasn't like that, and I'm really wish that I did speak Spanish. And I would love to. I mean, look, I'm not completely ignorant. I took it in high school and,
Hmm.
like most kids do in America. Um, but I didn't continue on with it. And I probably should have. Um, that's probably one of my biggest regrets of college, besides drinking too much and going to too many parties. But yeah, my early life was reading scary stories to tell in the dark. The stories
Hmm.
that I was told as a kid of La Llorona and La
Hmm.
Lechuza and all of these other tales and urban legends of Texas.
Hmm.
And then I just was a bookworm. I loved all kinds of books,
Hmm.
nonfiction, fiction. It wasn't until I was older that I could read things like Stephen King
Hmm.
and Kuntz and Anne Rice, but
Hmm.
there weren't many really Latino horror writers at all.
Hmm.
And certainly as a kid, there weren't any. There were no Goose. Well, I mean, R.L. Stein. I mean,
Sure.
all of the. It just the way the nature of the business then. And as I get older, I read more literary fiction that were by Latin writers. So
Hmm.
Fernando Cisneros and Rudolfo Anaya, um, Isabel Allende, but that's not horror. They were
Sure.
still really beautiful stories and culturally important to me. But horror was a little like proper horror was a little bit later.
What drew you to horror? I mean, I'm of the sensitive temperament, I think, where I'm like, scary stuff, why would I want to like is it was it I mean, did you see the allegory in them? Is it an escape? Was it just like how cool is these imaginative stories? What was it that drew you about horror?
Yeah, I thought it was cool because I loved the scary stories that I was told when it came to folklore and urban legend. I loved hearing about these dark creatures, these other worlds. And certainly, the history of Texas and the history of my ancestors in Mexico, it's dark. It is scary. It's terrifying.
Mm.
Um, and it just felt right to me. It's just interesting. It
Mm.
captured my imagination and I loved it.
Mm.
Um, un, it wasn't anything there was, I never read like the Sweet 16 books, which were really popular. the Babysitters Club, none of that. I never,
No? Oh man.
never, I never picked up a single one. I was like, okay, where? And, this was also kind of in tandem with going to Blockbuster and seeing
Uh-huh.
the really cool, 80s, 90s VHS covers that are just, I mean, they're just badass. So you're like
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street and Chud and Jason and oh man, Halloween, you name it. I loved it. Even like, Killer Tomatoes and
Oh wow.
The Bob, Jaws. I remember watching Jaws when I think I was like 6. So it's just been part of, yeah, just part of my upbringing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How much of the, I mean, you talk about like, your ancestors, your family's stories, like how much of that were you told and how much did you seek out later as part of research or just on your own? But like how much of that was just like a part of your daily life that you would hear about the, I guess like the revolution and those type of things?
Um, I would, they would just come up the stories in family, just kind of organically. But I would go to the library and seek out scary books, creepy
Hmm.
books. And certainly as I got older, I could raise the intensity and also watching, going and watching scarier horror films,
Hmm.
up in the ante. And I loved it. I loved it. And I guess the historical side was when I was in high school and in college, where I could further explore my identity, my cultural history.
Hmm.
And when I finally decided to write horror, um, it was just kind of like went from like 50 to 1,000. I just turned
Hmm.
up the notch
Hmm.
and, thought, well, why did I wait so long to do this?
Hmm. There's a scene in The Haunting of Alejandra where I want to say Alejandra goes to school and like she says something to the principal or some of the staff about La Llorona or similar story, and they're not outwardly racist, they're not terrible. They just what does that even mean?
Yeah.
The white
Yeah.
administrators. So I wonder, like, did you like with the stories that you were interested in? Where did you find the community? Like whether it was reading, you talked about some of the authors who really drew your interest, but like where were these communities you found, whether like in school, writers groups, or just like some of those writers that you found who really told your stories?
That's the thing. That's one of the reasons I started writing, because nobody was telling these stories. No one was really capturing it. The way I just felt it could be captured. No one was really doing it. And I looked at my Kindle and I looked at my book collection when I was, in my 30s before I started writing. And I thought, wow, why aren't all of these images and these stories coming out? Where are they? And so I kind of just went with it and have
Mm,
started doing it. And and you're getting a lot more people doing it, which I love. There are so many more writers uh taking their stories from their culture and their history and their families, and they're putting them out there, and I absolutely love it.
mm,
But a lot of it I just did on my own. I just had to search it out for my own and write my own stories.
mm.
um yeah, that's kind of how it began. Yeah, if you see it's not there, then do it, create it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was attributed maybe to Toni Morrison, this idea of like
Yep,
if you're
yep,
not right, if you're not
exactly.
seeing what you want to read, then make it yourself, create it yourself.
Yes, she did
Oh,
actually.
yeah, right.
I love Toni Morrison. I mean, beloved. I mean, that's a creepy story.
Yeah, right. It doesn't fit the genre, the horror genre necessarily, but right, exactly, creepy in a different way, man. Who are some of the contemporaries who are really thrilling you, inspiring you, making you want to continue to write your own?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. I think the indie horror community is just like exploding at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Really exploding, and it's great. I mean, you've got Gabino Iglesias, you have Gemma Moore, Haley Piper, Eric LaRocca, um, Laurel Hightower. You have, Brian Keene, who's been on the scene for a long time, but
Okay. Yeah.
he just really solid writing. Chuck Wendig. I mean, there's so many people out there that are
Yeah.
doing it, and it's great. Um, yeah. God, there's too many to name.
I got you. That's a good number. It sounds like it's really a thriving community for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so cool. The does I mean how does genre fit in? Like, do you I know for like publishers they want it to fit, the mold, so to speak. Like, I mean, do you feel like horror writing is limiting to you, like to call you a horror writer? Would you rather just be a writer, or is it like you fully embrace like, hey, this is what I write?
No, absolutely. I completely embrace it. But I also
Mhm.
write other things. I write science fiction. I write
Uh-huh.
erotic horror. I write loads of different things. And so, yeah, you call me a horror writer, I
Hmm.
don't mind because it is what I write. Um, but at the same time, I also give myself permission to write whatever I want,
Sure.
and mix genres.
Hmm. Man, sounds like somewhat seems like the main characters of The Haunting of Alejandra. How about that transition, huh?
Yeah.
Living, standing up on their own 2 feet kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? Doing their own thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Haunting of Alejandra came out in April.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to shout out, like, any cool places you'd like us to buy it, contact info,
Yeah.
and kind of how it's felt in the last month. I know obviously you're a veteran, it's not your first book, but like how it feels to have it out in the world.
I think with publishing, it takes so long from when
Mm.
you start to when it's finally out. It's almost anticlimactic because
Huh.
you've like seen it so many times and you've gone through edits and then all of the stuff. It's like, oh yeah, it is out. Oh yeah, now it's time to be out. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, I wrote that book. I forgot.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the process is so long, it's kind of like, oh, okay. Um, but yeah, it's good. And I really hope people pick it up and shout it out or leave reviews. It
Hmm.
all matters. It all counts
Yeah.
when you're a writer. And yeah, I mean, you can pick it up anywhere really. Barnes and Noble, indie.org, bookstop, everyone,
Uh-huh.
everywhere. Amazon, yeah. Which I'm
Okay.
really blessed. It's out there. Um, and there are many places for people to pick it up. But it's surreal because when I finished it during lockdown, so
Ah,
that's a
wow.
long time.
Yeah, that's a
I
long time.
Yeah, long kind of a long time ago, but yet not.
Right.
So
It seems
yeah,
it seems like decades ago, but also seems like yesterday, right?
yeah, exactly.
Oh, man. I'd love to know some of the seeds for the book.
Oh, I just was in a place where I needed an escape, and writing is always reading and writing, but mostly writing has just been my way
Hmm.
of um I guess working through my own stuff. And once I have an idea, I love to follow through
Yeah.
with it. And I just thought, I want to see more on La Llorona, something different, a different take on it.
Hmm.
Um, and then with lockdown, I just had lots of time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Where to go, nowhere to be.
Yeah.
And I just flew through it and worked through a lot of things I was personally experiencing. And yeah, and then there you go. It was there. And that was the book that also got me my agent. So it was,
Ah.
yeah, it was great. So it's just one of those ideas you have. And then as it so happened, I had a lot of time to finish it.
Hmm. I wonder, I mean, there's a lot to be said for like the allegory of the book, the symbols, like, represented it, what it represents, all the things it represents, themes. So I wonder if like, but it's also just like a really cool like page turner, like
Oh, thank
the
you.
images, yeah, the plot, like
Thank you.
the the plan that's hatched at the end and all of that is like really cool. So I wonder like kind of what came first, or like were they concurrent? Like, I want to tell a story. I want like, and again, it's not like didactic or like, patronizing and teaching lessons, but it's like, was it more of like the allegory and kind of like the symbols that kind of come first, or was it more just like the storyline, the plot?
It was first the storyline and the plot, and then just all of like an emotional dump. It
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
pulled out as like an emotional dump with kind of a plot and then it was just like blah. And then I go back and clean it up, and then the editors go back and clean it up more. So yeah, it is a layering process. It's like baking a cake,
Huh.
really. Yeah.
It's oh
Baking.
man. If it only were that easy to write such a great book, just same as baking a cake. Okay. Uh,
Lots of layers, lots of ingredients.
you're very humble in that way. Um, so the story starts with the epigraph from Flor Castillo. This kind of this idea of like listening to the women who have come before us, severing cords of generational curses, and
Mhm.
which is so cool because later in the book, you you have a story. One of the chapters is with Flor, and she says this exact
Yeah,
paragraph, or I think it's maybe a little bit more complete, but it's the exact same thing.
yeah.
Is Flor Castillo? I kind of like didn't look it up on purpose. I wanted to ask you, like, is Flor Castillo a real person,
No,
historical?
actually, she's not. But her friend that she fights with,
Hmm.
not Emiliano Zapata,
Ah,
the other fighter is an actual
oh wow.
uh, trans man Mexican
Hmm.
revolutionary,
Hmm.
really. Um, and I wanted to put that in there.
Hmm.
And but Flor Castillo and Emiliano Zapata is a real character.
Of course. Yeah.
And but Flor, no, that was just someone I made up.
Okay. Kind of like a combination of different characters, or just kind of more made up.
Just I wanted a character again because it's a generation of women. I
Hmm.
wanted I wanted people to see different types of mothers, different types of women
Hmm.
across as times changed,
Hmm.
and their influences and their circumstances and how their ideas of motherhood changed over time, and how they saw themselves
Hmm.
in the world as times changed,
Hmm.
and what are the things they wanted to accomplish in this life. How
Yeah.
were they feeling? What were they doing? What do they want to pass on to their children?
Hmm. So there are, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 maybe different narrators, from the family
Yeah,
line,
yep, yep.
right?
Yeah, I wanted to take it all the way back to the Spanish invasion. Yeah,
Yeah, what, 1520, something like that, with was the
yep.
first character. Yeah, man. 1521, I think, with Otzi. The book starts with Alejandra. She's at her wit's end.
Hmm.
She hears this voice basically saying, end it, like end it all, like
Yeah,
end your life. She's, like I said, she's at her wit's end. Her husband is definitely emotionally unavailable, to say the least. He's right. I mean, he's griping, saying, "Ah, you got everything you need. We've got financially, we're stable. You don't have to work
yeah.
anymore." But she feels worthless. She feels unloved. She feels like, also that guilt, like I should be happy according to, whatever society, blah blah blah. Um, and there's later on we get to know that she comes from she's adopted. She from a family of like evangelical Christians who really seem like they're really like do-gooders in the worst sense of the word. All right. Like really thought
Like
like
the Duggars.
patronizing. I'm sorry.
Like the Duggars. No, I'm kidding. I
Right?
guess.
I honestly don't know fully about yet, but yes. Right. But yeah, just kind of like thinking they can change the world but anyways, so she's going through that. And so those early scenes are really brutal. I mean, she's there's this manifestation of her worries. How would you describe the physical manifestation that comes like in the shower scene?
It's just like again, the anxiety, the pain,
Hmm.
the suicidal ideation, the everything that is plaguing her emotionally and mentally, um takes form in this creature, this La Llorona, this demon. And it's attracted to that feeling, that energy that she has,
Hmm.
and it wants to feed off her, and it knows that she's vulnerable, and it
Yeah.
feeds off of people's vulnerabilities.
Right.
And a lot of times when people are at rock bottom, when they're the most vulnerable,
Hmm.
is when those really scary thoughts start creeping in,
Yeah.
when they need the most support and help when they feel all hope is lost.
Right. And and Matthew's not going to be the one to be there for her. That's
No.
unfortunate, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think those of us who are parents, we know this idea of Alejandra describes it as like a stigmata, like the kind of like the pain, like these thorns that come with the roses. I'm not saying as eloquently as she did or as you wrote about it, but this idea that she does, she loves her kids so much, and there's this pain that comes from that because of the worry, because of the anxiety. She's cut off from her people in Texas. She lives in what, Philadelphia,
Yep.
right? And so she doesn't have that built-in just the
Support
comfort,
network.
the support
Yeah.
network, exactly, right? She just met her birth mother, maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple months before they left. Does that sound right?
Yeah, not long
Hmm.
enough for them to really spend the time she wanted to.
Right, right. Her I think it comes up in one of the questions her daughter asked, and she kind of was like, yeah, Alejandra is like, yeah, I and we were Chicana. Right. I didn't get to know a lot about it, growing up in the family that I did. And she tells her about La Llorona, and she's kind of like, oh shoot, have I gone too far? But she wants to
Mm.
share that, like, kind of like you talked about when being a kid, like there is pain and darkness in a lot of our family histories, right? I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how she feels so worn out. Is she just kind of feels like she's more of like a worker and a cook than she is a valued
Yeah, I
person,
think
right?
yeah, I think she, a lot of times, as parents, and it can be mother, father, sometimes there are single dads too, or grandparents or
Mm,
aunties taking care of kids. And when you're a guardian, and that is, you tend to put yourself last. A lot of times parents put themselves last. They tend to their kids, they tend to their sometimes their spouse,
mm,
putting food on the table, worry about everything, and at the end of the day there's nothing left. I think it's such a big responsibility having children, and
hmm
and being what children need to grow up well adjusted and happy, and not carry on their parents' demons and carry their parents' anxieties and worries. um, and and so yeah, she's never resolved her kind of stuff, her
hmm
issues, before having children, and it just doing so exacerbates all the unresolved generational trauma, all the unresolved trauma that she had,
hmm
and questions, um and not loving herself first, not having an ounce of self-love,
Yeah.
not giving herself enough care, so she could care for someone else
Hmm.
properly, with boundaries, with
Yeah.
um, the ability to, be who she is.
Hmm.
And a lot of times we do sacrifice ourselves, um, for things we think are important
Yeah.
because other people say they are. When in reality, is it really what we want? Is it really who we are? And
Dang,
that can be mothers, fathers, anyone.
these are deep questions. Man,
I told you, blame
man.
lockdown. I just sat there and was like,
Yeah. No, no, really deep questions. And I mean,
much time on my hands then.
right? No. It's like, I mean, the fact that she does feel silenced, by her own demons, if you will, by her own history, by Matthew, by his lack of emotional availability. But it's also like, she eventually, gets to talk to Melanie, who's the therapist, and who's obviously is great for her. But it just makes you think of like the previous people in her family line, the previous women in her family line, and how much they didn't
They
get a
didn't have that.
chance. They didn't
Yeah,
have that, right? They didn't have those escapes.
exactly.
Yeah. So
And I think,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, so no, I was going to say a lot of us, we talk to our parents and our grandparents and all the things that we have available to us that they didn't. And
Hmm.
sometimes people like, and it is, will sit there and say, I've said it. Yeah, but that's that generation. Oh, why do they think like that? Why do they say that? And you're like, because that's what their generation,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of that.
No doubt, no doubt about it. The so as part of this trying to get to know her family line and herself, she does the DNA report. I think you made up the company, right?
Yeah, I made up the company.
Something
Even though
about
it's based on 23andMe,
yeah,
there's
exactly. But pretty cool. It's like something like a tree, right? It's like DNA
yeah,
tree or something like that.
yeah.
Clever, clever. I liked it. And so with that, she's going to be, she'll eventually get, well, no, I'm sorry. Her mother got in touch with her, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it flashes back to Otzi. Am I saying that correctly?
Sorry.
Am I saying that correctly? Otzi,
Oh yes.
right? So from 1521,
Yep, Otzi, that's right.
right? And this is soon after the Spanish and the conquistadores, and it's like um this is, I guess, where the curse begins, you could say,
Yep, it is.
right?
Yep.
I don't know. You can tell as much or as little as you want about this deal that she makes with this spirit, with this demon, and about obviously the Spanish came, and they came with the cross and in one hand and the sword in the other,
Mhm.
and there was all kinds of death, and of course not that doesn't even begin to include the sicknesses that came, the disease. So it's a pretty horrific, hellish, atmosphere. I wonder how much you want to say about the deal she makes.
Yeah, I mean, so she, was taken by a Spanish man, which that, a lot of the indigenous women were forced to,
Hmm.
have relationships with these men, non-consensual. And she gets pregnant and she doesn't want that. She doesn't want to have the baby of this man. And she's fears for the child she already has and her family, considering all that's happening, like you mentioned, the disease, the destruction, the conversions, the war,
Hmm.
the enslavement. And so she wants to die. She doesn't want to carry on. She's lost hope. um and so she sacrifices herself for her family to escape, her daughter to escape,
Hmm.
and says, right, so you help me get revenge on this man and take these this pregnancy from me, and you can have them, because it eats the it eats the unborn
Hmm.
fetuses inside of her, and it also feeds on her despair, her hate, her
Hmm.
pain. And so the demon says, okay. And she also takes her life, so the demon gets all of that soul energy,
Hmm.
all of that pain. It feeds on it, and it does keep true to its promise. It finds the conquistador and destroys him and his family, in very brutal way. But part of that deal is then the demon gets to have her whole bloodline,
Hmm.
and that's the tie.
Yeah. The Like we said, going back to Alejandra's story, she finds Melanie Ortiz. She knows she needs help. She with these horrible things that are torturing her so much. These thoughts of suicide and such. And so she sees, okay, cool, Melanie Ortiz. She's a curandera. She specializes in generational trauma, and she really takes to her so quickly, and vice versa. And she really finds out through Melanie this connection about, like, well, she kind of knew, but like Katrina
Mm-hmm.
has, she's the one that's all dressed up nice, right? It's like the little umbrella,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Yep, yep.
And so as her, like a really strong woman, like I'm not going to pronounce the name correctly from the Nahuatl, but the indigenous woman, right, who kind of like morphed into Katrina, right, with this combination of the Spanish and the
Yes,
indigenous.
yes. Basically, the Aztec Queen of the Dead. Yeah,
Exactly.
Siwat. Yes, and that character is actually in my book, The Queen of Cicadas. So if you want
Ah,
to know more about her and her
hey.
vengeance and some crazy and a hate
Uh,
crime in 1950s Texas, pick up The Queen of Cicadas,
oh
and
man,
you
I meant to know how you connect those. Oh man.
so you get to see Mikdek Siwat and her full bloody glory.
All right. And then, something that's so great about Melanie is that she shares her own traumas,
Hmm.
right? She's not sitting there in judgment. She's not like, teaching from an ivory tower. She shares her own trauma, which is pretty extensive. But just going back to Katrina, I wonder, like, what is what's kind of like the story of Katrina, what she represents? She's kind of like a middle finger to like the establishment, to the rich. Like, how would you describe Katrina?
Yes, yeah. So basically, you know, a lot of the ideas from that we have now. If you go to Texas, you'll see Katrina everywhere.
Mm,
She's very famous. You see it, but yeah, basically an artist at the time wanted to say death comes to everyone. You can be
mm,
dressed in finery, you can be rich, you can be beautiful, you can be all these things,
mm-hmm.
but you will die. We all die. And she is a mixture, kind of like Santa Muerte,
Uh,
of the old gods and then the new gods,
mm-hmm.
God, La Virgen, the Virgin Mary,
Right.
all the saints brought over to convert and to make kind of the religion, Catholicism,
Mm-hmm.
more palatable,
Yeah, yeah.
and a way that they can receive it and
Uh-huh.
internalize it. So, but you still had through history people rejecting that and wanting to reject it, which is great.
Mm,
And then you have this kind of mixture of ideas and image imagery like Santa Muerte, like Katrina,
mm-hmm.
uh, which is I think is really cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so going along with the idea of like the combination of religions and traditions, and so Alejandra continues to be tortured by and also interested in, La Llorona and the story. And she, it's really, she puts that in like stark contrast to her evangelical background, where, she wasn't allowed to what was it, be in, what was the play? Was it like a Dracula type play?
Yeah, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Right? Bram Stoker, hey, two-time
Yeah.
nominated, two-time nominated. But yeah, just the idea that that was, in direct opposition to her background. So, she's slowly, with the help of Melanie, she's slowly kind of, coming more into her own, although there's definitely still a lot of issues. Um, she gets to know her mother more, her birth mother. Kathy gets her name is Kathy. Kathy gets her own story, gets her own chapter. Um, and her pregnancy really was like a one-time mistake. She really, really wanted the best for her daughter. I mean, she was a driven, really good academically, wanted to be a doctor. And the other, they're both immature, they're both in high school, they both knew they weren't ready to be parents, but the father was just like, peace, I'm out.
Yep, yep,
Right. He was with another girl like a week later.
yep.
Um, so I wonder about like Kathy's story, how she dealt with having to give up her daughter.
You know, it was one of those things. Was she going to do something that would completely alter her life and she knew she wasn't prepared for and knew she didn't want and knew she would probably resent and hate?
Hmm.
So, yeah, she did what she had to do. She didn't want to live like that. And she didn't want her child to experience that resentment, that hate,
Hmm.
that feeling of not being wanted.
Hmm.
And so she made that decision.
She herself came from Frances, who
Yeah.
was someone who again gets her own story, and she feels absolutely worthless. Her husband's cheating on her. She does her own cheating, but it doesn't fill the hole.
No.
Um, right? And she feels like, man, my kids are going to be better off without me. They truly, truly will be. And she basically walks into the water, right?
She does exactly what La Llorona wants.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And she
Fulfilling prophecy.
right. I mean, she, feels like she's sacrificing herself for their betterment,
Mm.
right? In the parallel story with Alejandra, she is cleansing. She has these records that she's gotten from Kathy, as token or memories, but she feels like she's been hoarding her whole life. Maybe not hoarding, but she feels like there are these material things that she doesn't have a connection to. And for her, it's like, well, who was the woman who went so big on Netflix a few years ago about like, if it doesn't make you feel better, you let it go.
Marie Kondo.
Yes, thank you. Right. And she really has one of those. And, and then again, a big step. She doesn't ask for Matthew's permission. She's just like, I'm going to get rid of this stuff. This
Yep.
reminds me of bad things. This was a former me and all of that. And, the therapy, the slow connecting with her mom or birth mom, and these are some of the things that start to make her feel better. Not that everything is, of course, wrapped up and nice and neat in a tiny box or anything